So a very warm welcome to this edition of Africa 360. We're the current affairs show that unpacks your continent's news and information. We go beyond those headlines to bring you what you won't get anywhere else. If it's about your continent, we'll certainly be talking about here on Africa 360. I'm Chris Maroleng, and indeed, this is Africa 360. He was Egypt's first democratically elected leader after a historic vote. But just after a year in office, his stay in power has ended. This week on Africa 360, we look at President Mohammed Morsi's removal from office and what it means for Egypt.
Well, the comparison is not between President Mubarak and President Morsi. The comparison is between the will of the people in January 2011 and the will of the people in June 2013.
All this and more coming up right here on Africa 360. Well, Egyptian President Mohammed Morsi was ousted in what, by all accounts, was and is a military coup on Wednesday. Morsi was the first democratically elected leader of Egypt as head of the Islamic group, the Muslim Brotherhood. He was meant to oversee the transition from former President Hosni Mubarak's dictatorial rule to a democratic society. However, it was not to be, as his term in office was characterized by turmoil.
Just some of the events from Wednesday night. On the one side, celebrations following Mohammed Morsi's ouster. On the other, violent protests. Some have called it a coup, whilst others call it a will of the people. Just hours after the military toppled Morsi, a new leader has been elected.
I vow to safeguard the republican system and to respect the law and constitution and to look after the interests of the people and to preserve the independence of the homeland and its safety.
But it's difficult to see how Mansour will be safeguarding the constitution when it's been suspended.
This roadmap includes suspending the constitution, holding early presidential and parliamentary elections, the formation of a national reconciliation committee that would include youth movements.
Mansour has the power to announce constitutional amendments, but only after a panel has reviewed them. He faces a difficult task, though, in putting together an amended constitution. Mohammed Morsi tried that too, one of the main reasons he's been criticized. The former president remains under house arrest. Prosecutors have issued arrest warrants for Morsi's allies too. They include Muslim Brotherhood leader Mohammed Badi and his deputy Kharait al-Shattah. They are accused of inciting violence. As celebrations continued in Cairo, it remains to be seen whether Morsi's forced removal from office will bring peace to all Egyptians. July Mohammed, Johannesburg.
Okay, let's take a look at the timeline, which shows some of the developments prior to President Morsi's removal from office. Now, the interesting thing about these developments is that the Egyptian crisis really began in 2011 with demonstrations against President Hosni Mubarak's rule. Mubarak, on the 11th of February, was eventually forced to step down from office. Now, the interesting thing is that Egypt held parliamentary elections in November of that year. The first round of voting in the presidential election saw Morsi and Ahmed Shafiq basically running head-to-head. Morsi eventually came out of that election as the winner, winning by 51% of that vote, as you can see from our graphic. On June the 30th, Morsi took the oath of office, and in August the 12th of that year, Morsi ordered the retirement of the top Mubarak era leadership from the military. On November the 22nd, Morsi himself was eventually seen as having consolidated his power base, particularly within the government structures of his country. Now, let's jump forward to December the 15th, where Egyptians approved the constitution by a margin of 63.8%, voting in favor of this. Now, the interesting thing is that on January the 25th, hundreds of thousands held protests against Morsi. They basically took to the streets. Clashes erupted in many urban areas and centers of Egypt, basically indicating their dissent of President Morsi's governance of his country. These protests rage in Port Said and other cities where dozens of people were killed. Morsi responded by reshuffling his cabinet during that very same period. On June the 30th, millions of Egyptians demonstrated, calling for Morsi to step down from office. Now, the crisis seemingly came to a head because on the first day of July, the military gave President Morsi and the opposition 48 hours to reach an agreement, failing which it would impose its own solution. Morsi stood firm, announcing that he would defend his legitimacy. On Wednesday, the 3rd of July, the military removed Morsi from power and appointed Al-Sisi and Adli Mansour, who is the head of the country's Supreme Constitutional Court, as the interim president. If you will recall, Al-Sisi was and is indeed the head of the armed forces of Egypt, ushering this dispensation where we saw the return of the armed forces into the governing structures. Now, let me share this statement, one of the last statements that came out from the president's office at the time. In his last Facebook post, Morsi said he denounced the developments as a full military coup. He said he totally rejected his overthrow by the army and asked Egyptian citizens to abide by the constitution and the law and not to respond to this coup. So do join us after the break, because when we return, we bring you in-depth analysis on what President Morsi's removal from office means for the people of Egypt, only on Africa 360.
I stand tall and proud of the achievement of the Egyptian people.
The Sisi decision is a good decision, and thank God Egypt reached this stage, because it was in a very bad situation.
We congratulate the Egyptian people for winning this. We are ecstatic, and we thank the great Egyptian army for taking the side of the people's will and of legitimacy and of the revolution.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa 360. Today we're focusing on the removal from office of Egypt's first democratically elected leader, Mohammed Morsi. And we're trying to understand just what this means for that country and its people. I'm now joined here in our studios by Ebrahim Dean from the Afro-Middle East Center, but also joining us from our Pretoria studios is Egyptian ambassador to South Africa, His Excellency Sherif Naguib. Now, Ebrahim, some analysts are actually describing this as blatantly as a coup, in the sense that the armed forces have seized power unconstitutionally, and therefore this can be seen as a coup. Do you agree with this assessment?
The armed forces have seized power, the constitution has been suspended, TV channels have been stopped from broadcasting, the military has taken over state radio stations, state television stations, and the state newspaper. And this points to the fact that it's a coup. It may be supported by a wide segment of Egyptian society and the Egyptian population, but it's necessarily and emphatically is actually a coup.
Ambassador Naguib, here we've had Ebrahim describing the events that have happened in your country as a coup. Is this a correct assessment or reading of these events in your view, sir?
Today, Chris, I stand tall and proud of the achievement of the Egyptian people. Today, we have witnessed a process of 30 million people going to the street, voicing their decisions and choices with regard to the future of Egypt. They have voted a no confidence on the former president, and this was the voice of the people.
But Ambassador, you're saying that they have voted. In actual fact, my understanding is that there was no vote. The person who was voted and duly elected was indeed President Morsi.
Chris, when you elect a president, you don't give him a blank check to do what he pleases. When people are not happy and when people are asked you to leave, then you have to abide by the will of the people. You cannot talk about legitimacy. You cannot talk about constitutionality if you don't respect the rule of law and if you don't respect the will of people.
You've heard Ambassador's position. It sounds like he's saying that they, in actual fact, can be a legitimate and democratic coup. What's your view on that?
I mean, theoretically, this is not possible. Theoretically, practically, it's not possible to have a democratic coup, as you well said, and as you well said previously. Morsi won an election the year previous, the past year. It's basically 1 year since he's won the election. And yes, a president does not necessarily have a blank check. The question, though, is how much time do you give, or do you provide him, and to attempt to change the course of events? And if so, when you remove him, you should remove him through a democratic process. There's parliamentary elections scheduled for soon, or were to be scheduled were it not for the judiciary halting the process. Were it not a coup and were it a proper democratic transfer of power which would protect democracy, Egyptians would then have voted from then. Further, the Honorable Ambassador Naguib has made some certain inconsistencies, and he's talked about 30 million people in the streets. And this, firstly, is incorrect. There may have been 22 million signatures on the Tamarrud website, but there was no estimate whatsoever has said that there were 30 million people on Cairo streets. Moreover, Ambassador Naguib, His Excellency, has underplayed and conspicuously missed the fact that many rallies were, the anti-Morsi rallies were larger than the pro-Morsi rallies, but there were many pro-Morsi rallies over the past.
Let's give Ambassador Naguib the chance to respond.
Well, thank you, Chris. I don't think there was any sort of inconsistency of what I said. When I said 30 million people, I'm talking about the whole of Egypt. We have to remember as we speak that 3 young people, all within the age of 30, 35 years old, they have managed to bring 22 million petition. And also it's very important that as we sit here in Pretoria or Johannesburg, that we should appreciate the feeling of the people in the street in Cairo. We cannot judge.
But the question that I have to you, sir, is then, if it is the implication that the will of the people has resulted in this change process that we've seen unfolding in your country, has this not set a very worrying and indeed scary precedence around what the people then are entitled to do when this blank check that you described doesn't seem to be cashed in the view of those very same people? What happens in the future?
We have had the same reaction when Mubarak was ousted from power. And it was the same argument.
The difference is Mubarak's head was not democratically elected through an election that the international community viewed as free and fair. The 2010 Mubarak elections, the parliamentary elections, saw the Muslim Brotherhood members having to run as independents. The party could not run as a party. The slogan "Islam is the way of life" was banned during the 2010 parliamentary elections. Does that now say that? Does that mean now that, or does that in a way legitimize or mean that the election is now a free and fair election?
Well, the comparison is not between President Mubarak and President Morsi.
You did then say that.
The comparison is between the will of the people in January 2011 and the will of the people in June 2013. And this is the will of the people that we need to respect. We don't use the word election. We don't use the word coup. We are thinking about the people. You in South Africa here, you also had to take into consideration the will of the people. How a large segment of the population and the society are not sidelined. Now we are calling for an open dialogue that is an all-inclusive to all segments of the society. Now, as it was reported earlier about TV and symbols of the Muslim Brotherhood, there is nothing wrong against the Muslim Brotherhood, but we have everything to believe that using the language of hatred, using the language of jihad, using the language of isolating a large segment of the society, this is something that you do not accept in South Africa, and that was not accepted in Egypt. People of Egypt are moderate people, and they did not accept the mismanagement of their economy and the sidelining of a large segment and a lot of political forces.
Do stay with us, because we'll continue this vibrant conversation after the break as we continue to focus on Egypt's political future right here only on Africa 360.
When Morsi did not fulfill his commitment, the people of Egypt came in the street and asked him to leave.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa 360. Today, we're focusing on Egypt and what the future holds for the country following days of protests that led to President Morsi being removed from office. One of the issues that we have to debate has been this role of the military in the politics of Egypt. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Ever since the 1950s, when Gamal Abdel Nasser was brought into power as a result of a military coup, the military has played an active role in Egyptian life. And this owes to the fact that, firstly, the leaders were previous military generals. Secondly, the military as an institution in Egypt is a large institution. It controls many different factories, many industries. It provides bread, especially in a poor society, and thus it has an extended reach. And moreover, it receives a lot of funding from the international community, specifically after the Egypt-Israeli peace treaty.
Civil-military relations in Egypt appear to be enabling of the military to engage in the civilian sphere now and again in times of political crisis. One would have hoped that in actual fact that we would have seen an end of this prevailing presence of the military in the politics of your country.
It's very simple. The origin of this is the challenges and the different wars that Egypt has to go to for the last 60 or 70 years. So Egypt always stands proud of its military. But again, this does not give a carte blanche for the military to interfere in our civilian governance. That's one. The second thing, I think, after the transitional period, when the SCAF was responsible for the transitional period, and after delivering power freely and peacefully to a civilian, to an elected president, it was very clear to the world that the military are not interested in governing the country. Now you are going to tell me, but they are back, and they have asked President Morsi, former President Morsi, to leave. But my answer is, we have a new civilian president, interim president, that was sworn in. We have also a new government that is now being ready to function once the members are nominated. And members of this government and supporter of the military are the same individuals who were against the SCAF, which is the military that ruled Egypt after President Mubarak, asking the SCAF to leave the country.
So, Ambassador,
so we're not consistent when we talk about the military.
Ambassador, I think the inconsistency arises in the fact that at certain stages, the question must arise: when will the military stay out of the civilian affairs in Egypt?
And I can tell you many symbols of the opposition who were yesterday during and attending that press statement, all of them and the military themselves agree that they don't want to rule the country. The fact that the country was ruled before by military, it was simply because that every 10 years Egypt had to go through a war with its neighbor.
Right, then...
And this is a great challenge. It's a great challenge for any people.
Understood.
Fighting for 60 years.
Understood.
And that's
understood,
why
Ambassador.
You had a military role.
Understood, Ambassador. Let's bring in Ebrahim here. Now we've heard the Ambassador essentially giving us the lay of the ground, the official position on how we should perceive what has happened in Egypt. But one of the questions that immediately arises is, in your view, what do you think the response of the Muslim Brotherhood will be to these developments?
The Brotherhood has not set back. Morsi's Twitter account is still active, and he has tweeted still affirming the fact that he is still the legitimately democratic president. However, the Brotherhood is not a violent organization. It renounced violence in the 1970s, and thus, yes, the polarization will have increased, but and stability may deteriorate within the country, but the chances of a civil war erupting over this are seriously inhibited.
Now, Ambassador, it must be very concerning that there is the possibility that this could unfold in further bloodshed. Some people saying we could see a civil war brewing in Egypt.
We are peaceful people. We care for each other. And whether it's Muslim Brotherhood or no Muslim Brotherhood, the Egyptian people will never go through a civil war because of a simple question that we appreciate life and we appreciate dialogue and we are all brothers and sisters. That's to answer your first question. Second question is about the Muslim Brotherhood. It seems that Ebrahim has a lot of knowledge about the Muslim Brotherhood, whether they are violent or not. Nobody has stigmatized the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is a segment of the political society. They make part of the political scene that was ostracized for so many years, and they had that chance to come back and attend an election and win an election. Now, as we talk now, in this spirit of all-inclusive dialogue, Muslim Brotherhood, as well as all other factions in our society, political faction I'm talking, they are most welcome to join in a peaceful dialogue, respecting the rights of others and respecting human rights and constitutionality. I'm sure it's the same thing that you have here in South Africa. You will never allow anybody to come here and address people in a language full of hatred and calling for jihad and calling for blood. These are things that are not accepted in Egypt. It's not accepted in South Africa. And I'm sure it's for the people of Egypt to decide whether they accept this language or not.
What do you believe will be the ultimate end state from this process that we've seen?
I want you to open the television and look at the crowds. Look at the people, as joyful as they were yesterday. When Mubarak was not respecting the people asked him to leave. When Morsi did not fulfill his commitment, the people of Egypt came in the street and asked him to leave. Now, any future leader of Egypt will have to respect the will of the people, as much as I'm asking my colleague here, Mr. Ebrahim, and yourself, to respect that will.
Now, Ebrahim, the ambassador seems to believe that your statements are an actual fact, ignoring the will of the people, in the sense that what you appear to be warning is that there could be terrible consequences from allowing such a situation to unfold in Egypt.
Ambassador Naguib, His Excellency, is talking about the will of the people. So what about the will of the people, 51% of them who voted for Morsi last year? The will of the people who passed the referendum? The will of the people who voted in 45% electoral successes for the Brotherhood itself during the 2011-2012 parliamentary elections? Are those people, do they not have wills? Do we put above some liberalists and secularists' wills over, quote, Islamist wills? The ambassador needs to accept that this was a military coup, that this does increase the process, the chances of instability within the country, and that any incoming president will still face the same problems that Morsi did, and is likely to fail at the same thing, because as is commonly cited, the main reason people became disillusioned with Morsi wasn't the whole exclusionary, inclusionary Islamist secularist aspect. It was actually economic standstill and economic disinvestment and the lack of economic growth, and these are structural problems.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time to continue our conversation. All that's left for me to do, Your Excellency, is really to wish the people of Egypt all the best during this very difficult time. And to you, Ebrahim Dean, thank you for joining us on Africa 360. That does indeed bring us to the end of yet another edition of your program. If you'd like to leave a comment or join the debate on Africa, you can certainly find us on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter or drop us an email on africa360@enca.com. So until next time, when we look forward to bringing you Africa like you've never seen it before, take care. Thank you so much.